down the mountains and now I gotta hide. Because maybe it's a kidnapper.
In the final hours of October 17th, 2024, Elliot Eastman was still online. He was thousands of miles from the small town in Vermont where his life began. He was sitting inside his home in Cebuco, a coastal municipality in the southern Philippines. To his viewers, this was supposed to be another glimpse into his unusual new life. But by then, Elliot no longer sounded like someone simply chasing adventure. He sounded tired and he sounded unsure. And when someone asked if he was enjoying life in the Philippines, his answer was not simple. He said there were parts he liked and there were parts he didn't. You see, by then, for months, Elliot had been telling people that the place he lived was dangerous. He had called it the Red Zone. He had spoken about threats. He had said his life was at risk. And still, for some reason, he stayed. Just a short time after that final live stream, 4 armed men arrived at his home. It's rare to find a case that is so well documented by the victim. So let's dissect Elliot's brutal downfall piece by piece and delve into the disturbing evidence together. Here we go. Elliot O'Neill Eastman was 26 years old and he came from Hinesburg, Vermont, a quiet town far removed from the place where his name would later appear in international reports. He graduated from Champlain Valley Union High School all the way back in 2016. I can't actually believe that is a decade ago. Years before the abduction, he'd already started building an online presence. His YouTube channel began in 2015, and over time it became a record of his life, his travels, and his search for something outside the life he knew. Elliot appeared restless, like he wanted a different kind of life. He wanted experiences that did not look like the same streets, the same lake, and the same familiar feeling of home. That search eventually took him to the Philippines. More specifically, it took him to Cebuco in Zamboanga del Norte. A lot of people moved to different countries, but Cebuco was not a normal tourist destination. It was not like Manila or Cebu. It was not one of the safer expat areas that foreigners usually choose when relocating to the Philippines. Cebuco sits in a region with a long history of security problems, including armed groups, criminal networks, poverty, and past kidnappings. Foreign governments had warned travelers because of risks including crime, civil unrest, and abduction. So from the beginning, Elliot's move was unusual, and it placed him inside a known risk zone. But Elliot did not go there only for content. He had met a local woman named Carisha Jala, and their relationship became one of the anchors of his life in the Philippines. They married in a traditional Muslim ceremony, and Elliot converted to Islam for the occasion. After a brief return to the United States for work, he came back to Cebuco in 2024. By May of that year, he had settled there more permanently. He lived in Sitio Tungawan, Barangay Poblacion. He filmed his daily routine. He showed the shoreline, the local community, his home, and the slower pace of life. To viewers, it could look peaceful, but peace and safety are not the same thing. That contrast became one of the central themes in Elliot's story. On one side, there was the life he wanted to show, a new marriage, a new home, a remote place where he stood out. On the other side, there were warnings, threats, and the reality of a region where local security could not always respond fast enough. Elliot seemed totally aware of this, and he spoke openly about the danger. He described the area as the Red Zone. He said his life was still at risk while he was there. That creates the first major question in the case. Was Elliot ignoring the danger, or had he simply become used to it? Because when risk becomes part of daily life, it can start to feel normal. And for Elliot, that may have been one of the most dangerous changes of all. As 2024 continued, Elliot's videos began changing in tone. The earlier excitement was still there, but underneath it was a growing tension. He spoke more openly about fear. He talked about danger in ways that no longer sounded hypothetical. And because he uploaded so frequently, Viewers were able to watch that shift happen almost in real time. Jack here just quickly, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to mention channel memberships. Channel memberships are making a huge difference right now, and currently 278 of you are channel members, and I'm actually aiming for 300 by the end of May. Because with the way YouTube works right now, channel members, you just kind of need them or it doesn't work. Thank you so much, love you all. This is the end of Forest Jack, back to Studio Jack again, and Elliot's story. By 2024, Elliot had posted hundreds of videos documenting his life in Cebuco. That amount of footage is important to this case, because it created a detailed public record of his routines, his location, his surroundings, and even his concerns. In several videos, Elliot spoke about people disliking him. He suggested he had received threats. He also described situations where he felt watched. One video posted in early October became especially unsettling after the abduction. Elliot was walking near the shoreline with his wife when he noticed armed men nearby. His tone immediately changed. He pointed out the weapons. He noted how many people were there, and he actually sounded nervous too. What makes moments like that significant is not just the fear itself. It is the fact that Elliot kept documenting these encounters publicly while remaining in the same area. That visibility may have increased his vulnerability. He was not anonymous in Cebuco. He was one of the only foreigners living there long term, and he openly discussed money, projects, and investments online. In one video, Elliot spoke about spending large amounts on equipment, including Starlink internet systems and solar panels. He also discussed helping build a small store connected to his wife's family.
I think total, I built this waiting shed too. That costed like $15,000 just for this waiting shed. And the roof and everything. See, it's pretty nice. I spent 15,000 pesos alone just on this waiting shed, I'm pretty sure. And then on the solar, the Wi-Fi and the solar, I think I spent a total like 130K or something, maybe 120. Yeah, 130K, 130,000 pesos on the solar, the Wi-Fi with solar. Maybe even more now because I just bought another solar panel. Maybe it's getting to like 140,000 pesos. Our inverter just broke the other day too, which was like 5,000 pesos. This yellow one.
Online discussion later focused heavily on another allegation, that Elliot had been lending money locally at high interest rates. This point needs to be handled carefully though, because it's not fully corroborated. But some Reddit users and online commentators claimed he was operating as a loan shark. However, much of this information remains unverified or based on interpretation of his own videos. What can be said factually is that Elliot publicly discussed financial transactions online while living in a high-risk area where foreigners already attracted attention. That combination alone carried risk, especially in a place where criminal groups, personal disputes, and local tensions could escalate quickly. In September 2024, he said directly that the area was the most dangerous area in the country. He actually admitted that his life was at risk. Friends, locals, and officials reportedly warned him to leave, but Elliot stayed, partly because of his relationship, partly because his content depended on being there, and possibly because over time, surviving in that environment made him believe he could continue doing it safely. That process is sometimes called normalization of risk. The more a dangerous situation repeats without immediate consequences, the more normal it can begin to feel, until eventually the warning signs stop functioning as warnings. And by October 2024, there were already many warning signs surrounding Elliot Eastman.
Flowers. Look at these shoes. These shoes are so nice.
Yes.
For climbing.
Up and down the mountains, and now I gotta hide. Because maybe it's a kidnapper.
Sige. movie.
Or go first. Yeah, I know.
Kidnappers.
Okay.
Let's see where I am. What? No. I wonder what they're doing. Maybe they're spearfishing. They're spearfishing. I think these people are spearfishing. Looks like the guy had a gun. What are they, spearfishing? Are they spearfishing? Huh? Maybe, right? Maybe they're spearfishing. There's like 5 or 6 of them. And they're looking at us, or at me. They're like, they're interested.
On October 17th, 2024, Elliot Eastman went live one final time, and the video was strange. The stream lasted less than many viewers expected, and people watching noticed something different almost immediately. Elliot looked exhausted. He sat on the floor of his home, speaking far less than usual. There were long pauses. His energy was low. At one point, a viewer asked whether he enjoyed living in the Philippines.
Enjoying Philippines. I'm enjoying it. There's some parts that I like about it, there's some parts that I don't like about it. What don't I like about it? The bathrooms are smelly. They don't smell good. Most of the times. Yeah. I'm just getting tired of like being around all the same people. Yeah.
The stream ended without a dramatic goodbye. No indication that within hours, police would be responding to reports of an armed abduction. Later that night, at around 11 p.m., 4 armed men reportedly arrived at Elliot's home in Sitio Tungawan, and according to investigators, the men posed as police officers. They were dressed in dark clothing and carried M16 rifles, and what happened next unfolded quickly. Police said Elliot resisted. This detail became central to the later investigation because investigators believed the struggle changed the outcome of the abduction itself. During the confrontation, Elliot was reportedly struck twice by a firearm. One round reportedly hit his leg. Another struck his abdomen or torso area. Investigators later recovered rifle casings and signs of blood loss from the scene. The attackers then forced Elliot away from the property and toward the shoreline. There they loaded him onto a motorized banker. A banker is a narrow outrigger boat, commonly used throughout the Philippines, by the way. Witnesses reported the boat heading out into the darkness toward the Sulu Sea. Local officers attempted pursuit, but the attackers disappeared into the night. This part of the case created immediate uncertainty for investigators. Normally, kidnappings involving foreigners in the region were associated with ransom demands, but no ransom demand publicly appeared. No proof of life emerged either. That absence changed how investigators interpreted the case. It raised the possibility that the motive may not have been financial in the traditional sense, but at that stage, police still hoped Elliot could be rescued alive. Search operations began almost immediately. Task groups were formed. The FBI and the US Embassy coordinated with Philippine authorities. Coastal areas and nearby islands were searched. and for weeks the case remained suspended between two possibilities. Either Elliot was still alive somewhere in the region, or the abduction had already ended in tragedy before the boat ever reached its destination. In the days after the abduction, investigators treated the case as an active kidnapping. Search teams focused on coastlines, islands, and possible routes through the Sulu Sea. Checkpoints increased across parts of western Mindanao. Police coordinated with military units and maritime patrols. And because the victim was an American citizen, the case quickly gained international attention. The FBI became involved alongside Philippine authorities. But almost immediately, investigators faced a major problem. There was no communication from the abductors, no ransom demand, no proof of life, no negotiation. That silence became one of the most disturbing parts of the case. Historically, kidnappings involving foreigners in parts of Mindanao often involved ransom operations. Foreign nationals could be viewed as high-value targets, but Elliot's case did not follow that pattern publicly. As investigators searched for answers, arrests began to happen quickly. Several suspects were identified by police during late October 2024. Some surrendered. Others were arrested during operations connected to the investigation. Then the case escalated again. In November 2024, authorities tracked several suspects to another area of the Zamboanga Peninsula. A violent encounter followed. 3 men linked to the case were killed during a shootout with police. That development mattered for 2 reasons. First, it suggested investigators were closing in on the network involved. But second, it also meant potential information about Elliot's whereabouts may have died with them. Then came the breakthrough that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. In December 2024, police said they received statements from individuals connected to the suspects. According to investigators, one account came from a relative, another came from a captured participant in the abduction itself. The statements described what police believe happened after Elliot was taken onto the boat. According to those accounts, Elliot's injuries became fatal while the kidnappers held him on the boat. Police believed he passed from the loss of vital fluids caused by the attack with the M16. The suspects allegedly panicked, and according to the statements, they disposed of Elliot's body in the sea. That revelation fundamentally changed the case. Search efforts shifted from rescue to recovery, and on December 5, 2024, Philippine police publicly stated that they were constrained to believe Elliot Eastman had died. But there was still one major complication. No body had been recovered. Without remains, investigators could not provide definitive forensic confirmation. No autopsy could be performed. No exact timeline of his passing could be verified independently. Police acknowledged this openly. They stated that while all available information pointed toward Elliot's death, the lack of a recovered body left a small remaining uncertainty. That uncertainty kept the case suspended in a strange space, officially presumed dead, but physically missing. And because the sea where investigators believed his body was discarded covered such a vast area, recovery efforts became extremely difficult. Strong currents, weather conditions, and the passage of time worked against search teams. Despite dives, patrols, and coastal searches, nothing was ever found. No remains, no clothing, no physical closure for the family. Only statements from suspects describing what they claimed had happened on the boat that night. Even after the arrests, one major question remained unresolved. Why was Elliot Eastman targeted? Police identified suspects and authorities then arrested the alleged mastermind in January 2025. But the motive itself remained unclear, and into that uncertainty came speculation. Online discussions exploded after the case gained international attention, especially on Reddit and expat forums focused on the Philippines. Some people believed the abduction was financially motivated. Others believed it was personal. Some theorized that Elliot's visibility online made him a target. Others pointed toward local resentment, territorial tensions, or conflict connected to money lending. But much of this remained speculation, and separating fact from theory became increasingly difficult. What is confirmed is that Elliot openly documented nearly every aspect of his life online. His routines, his location, his projects, his fears, his finances, and his frustrations. All of it became public. That level of visibility may have made him unusually exposed in an already unstable environment, especially because Elliot was not hiding in a large city. He was one of the only foreigners living long-term in a remote area, already associated with security concerns. And according to multiple reports, he had been warned repeatedly about the danger. Then, in January 2025, investigators announced another major breakthrough. Police arrested Jakaria Siddiq Jamani, who they identified as the alleged mastermind behind the abduction. He was captured near the Basilan Strait during an operation connected to the case. By that point, several suspects were already dead, several were in custody, and others remained at large. But even with those arrests, major questions still lingered. Why was there no ransom? Was Elliot meant to survive the abduction originally? Did the resistance during the confrontation change the outcome entirely? Or was the operation always intended to end violently? Investigators never fully answered those questions. And because Elliot's body was never recovered, some uncertainty continues to surround the final moments of the case. Today, Elliot's YouTube channel still exists online. Hundreds of videos remain available, and watching them now feels very different than when they were first uploaded. At the time, they looked like travel videos from a man building an unusual life abroad. Now they feel closer to a record of escalating danger. The warnings are difficult to ignore in hindsight. The references to fear, the discussions about threats, the comments about kidnapping, the visible anxiety in the final weeks. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that Elliot himself seemed to understand the risk better than many viewers did. He openly called the area dangerous. He acknowledged his life was at risk. But over time, the danger appears to have become part of normal life. That may be the central tragedy of this case. Not simply that Elliot entered a dangerous place, but that he slowly adapted to the danger around him until leaving no longer seemed necessary. And in the final hours before the abduction, sitting quietly during his last live stream, it almost felt as though that reality had finally caught up with him.
I need you to take a leap of faith. I need you to take a leap of faith.
On the morning of July 4th, 2022, thousands of people gathered along the streets of Highland Park, Illinois, to watch the town's annual Independence Day parade. The event had begun just minutes earlier. Families lined the sidewalks. Children sat on folding chairs. Music drifted through the air as parade floats slowly moved along Central Avenue. At approximately 10:14 a.m., something suddenly interrupted the celebration. From somewhere above the street, a rapid series of loud cracks echoed through the parade route. At first, many people did not understand what they were hearing. Some thought it might be fireworks. Others began looking around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Within seconds, confusion turned into panic. People began running, parents grabbed their children. Strollers and chairs were left behind in the street as the crowd rushed to find cover. From a rooftop overlooking the parade route, someone had opened fire. By the time police reached the building where the shots had been fired, the person responsible was already gone. Someone had carried out a highly coordinated attack in the middle of a holiday celebration and then disappeared into the surrounding streets. In this video, I'll walk through the disturbing facts behind this case and show you the horrifying evidence from the crime scene. Highland Park is a suburban community located roughly 25 miles north of Chicago. The town has a population of about 30,000 residents. Every year, the city hosts an Independence Day parade that attracts large crowds from the surrounding area. In 2022, the parade was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. The route started at the intersection of Laurel Avenue and St. John's Avenue. From there, the procession moved north along St. John's before turning west onto Central Avenue. The parade would eventually continue towards Sunset Woods Park. Shortly after the event began, music could be heard coming from several floats moving along the route. One of those floats carried a klezmer band performing for the crowd. Spectators stood along the sidewalks, watching as the parade slowly passed through the downtown area. Then, about 14 minutes after the parade began, the gunfire started. Investigators would later determine that the shots were being fired from the rooftop of a building located at the northwest corner of Central Avenue and 2nd Street. The building housed a business called Ross Cosmetics. From that rooftop position, the person responsible had a clear view of the parade route below. According to prosecutors, the attacker fired 83 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle. The shooting lasted approximately 40 seconds. During that time, people along the parade route began running in every direction. Some spectators initially froze, unsure what was happening. Others immediately grabbed family members and tried to escape the area. Within moments, the streets were filled with abandoned chairs, strollers, and personal belongings. While some people fled the scene, others remained behind to help the injured as several civilians began providing medical assistance, even before emergency responders arrived. First responders from multiple agencies soon rushed toward the downtown area. Police began securing the parade route while paramedics treated victims where they had fallen. The situation unfolding in Highland Park was quickly recognized as a mass casualty incident. 7 people would ultimately lose their lives as a result of the attack. 48 others would suffer injuries, ranging from gunshot wounds to injuries caused by flying debris. As officers began searching the building where the shots had originated, they made an immediate discovery. The rooftop where the gunfire had come from was empty. The shooter had already fled the scene. The question investigators now faced was a critical one. Where had the attacker gone? And how had someone managed to vanish so quickly after carrying out an attack in the middle of a crowded holiday parade? When officers reached the rooftop of the Ross Cosmetics building, they quickly confirmed that the person responsible had already left the area. However, investigators did locate one critical piece of evidence. A rifle had been left behind. According to police, the firearm had fallen from the suspect's bag during his escape. The weapon was recovered within minutes and secured as evidence. Its discovery immediately confirmed that the shots had been fired from that rooftop position, but the person who had used it was nowhere to be found. This raised an urgent problem for investigators. If the suspect had already escaped the downtown area, he could be moving anywhere. Police began expanding the search perimeter beyond the immediate parade route. Officers from Highland Park Police Department were soon joined by additional law enforcement agencies, including Illinois State Police and the FBI. More than 100 officers would ultimately be involved in the search. As investigators began piecing together what had happened after the shooting, new information started to emerge. Witnesses reported seeing a vehicle leaving the area shortly after the gunfire stopped. The vehicle was described as a small hatchback. Authorities later identified it as a 2010 Honda Fit. The information about that vehicle quickly became a central focus of the search. Police began broadcasting descriptions to surrounding agencies as the investigation expanded beyond Highland Park. Hours passed without an arrest. Then during the afternoon, a development occurred that would significantly change the direction of the manhunt. 2 individuals in a nearby city believed that they had spotted the vehicle authorities were searching for. The witnesses observed the car traveling southbound along US Route 41 near the town of Wadsworth. They immediately contacted emergency services. For approximately 13 minutes, the witnesses remained on the phone with a 911 dispatcher while continuing to follow the vehicle at a distance. That real-time information allowed law enforcement to begin positioning officers ahead of the car's path. Eventually, police located the vehicle near the intersection of US Route 41 and Wesley Road in Lake Forest. Officers conducted a traffic stop. Inside the vehicle was a man who matched the description investigators had begun circulating earlier in the day. The driver was taken into custody without incident. The arrest occurred at approximately 6:30 p.m. More than 8 hours had passed since the first shots were fired at the parade. At that moment, authorities finally had a suspect in custody. Investigators soon identified the man as 21-year-old Robert Eugene Cremo III. But one critical question remained unanswered. Who exactly was Cremo? And how had he managed to carry out an attack on such a vast scale?
Sorry to disturb you guys, just a really quick one. I'm currently on a mission to hit 300 channel members by the end of May, so I've got about 2 weeks to do that. I'm currently at 278, And thank you guys so much. It's incredible how much support you guys show me, and it means a ton to me, seriously. Channel memberships are allowing me to continue to make this content, and that's not an exaggeration, and it's not a guilt trip either. It's just a fact of YouTube at the moment. If you can support via channel memberships, then please do, and thank you so much. If you already are, then I love you. Marry me, all 278 of you. But now, let's get back to the video.
Cremo was 21 years old at the time of the attack. He lived in the Highland Park area, the same community where the Independence Day parade had taken place. This meant the suspect was not an outsider who had travelled to the town. He was someone familiar with the area. After being taken into custody, Cremo was transported to a police station for questioning. During a recorded interview with investigators, he eventually admitted to carrying out the attack. According to police, Cremo described how he had accessed the rooftop overlooking the parade route. Investigators determined that he had climbed an exterior ladder attached to the Ross Cosmetics building. Once on the roof, he positioned himself where he could see the crowd gathered below. When investigators searched the vehicle Cremo had been driving, they discovered another firearm inside. Authorities later revealed that Cremo had driven north toward Madison, Wisconsin, after leaving Highland Park. According to prosecutors, he had considered carrying out another attack during a public celebration in that city. However, investigators stated that he ultimately decided not to follow through with that plan. At some point during the drive, Cremo also discarded his cell phone in Middleton, Wisconsin. Police would also later discover that the rifle used in the attack had been legally purchased. The weapon had been bought online and shipped to a firearms store called Red Dot Arms in Lake Villa, Illinois, where it was picked up by Cremo. This raised another critical question. How had a 21-year-old been able to legally obtain the weapon used in the attack? The answer would lead investigators back several years, to a series of earlier incidents that had already brought Cremo to the attention of police.
I have memories of him being really distant and cold if anybody did try to talk to him, showing up late for class, not listening to teachers. He had a dark mind and had been obsessed with guns and weaponry since I was really young, and would doodle weapons on his notebook, and that was something that a friend had brought to my attention the other day. That is a scary, maybe warning sign.
And when you heard the news that it was him, sadly, it wasn't a shock that it was him.
Yes, and I am speaking for myself there, but I do not think it would even be any what of an assumption to say that a lot of other people had very similar responses to me, that we were not surprised.
As investigators began examining Cremo's background, they discovered that this was not the first time his behavior had raised concerns. Police records showed that officers had previously responded to incidents involving him several years before the attack. One of those incidents occurred in April 2019. During that event, police were called after a report that Cremo had attempted suicide. Officers responded to the situation and documented the call. No criminal charges were filed at that time. A second incident occurred later that same year. In September 2019, a family member contacted police and reported that Cremo had made threats to kill everyone. When officers arrived, they conducted a search of the residence. During that search, police confiscated multiple weapons. Authorities reported recovering 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword. These items were taken as part of the police response to the reported threat. At the time, no criminal charges were filed in connection with the incident. The weapons were eventually returned after Cremo's father stated that the items belonged to him. Although the situation had not resulted in charges, officers did take an additional step. Police submitted what is known in Illinois as a clear and present danger report to the Illinois State Police. This type of report is intended to alert authorities when someone has displayed behavior that may indicate a risk of harm to themselves or others. However, the report alone does not automatically result in legal restrictions. It instead becomes part of a record that may be considered during future background checks. For investigators reviewing these earlier incidents after the parade shooting, the sequence of events raised an obvious question. If these warning signs had already been documented, how had Cremo later been able to legally purchase firearms? The answer would lie in a decision that occurred only a few months after the threat report had been filed. In December 2019, Robert Cremo III applied for a firearm owner identification card. In Illinois, the FOID card is required for individuals who wish to legally purchase or possess firearms and ammunition. Because Cremo was under 21 years old at the time of the application, state law required that a parent or guardian sponsor the request, and it would be Cremo's father, Robert Cremo Jr., that agreed to provide that sponsorship. Once the application was submitted, the Illinois State Police conducted a background review. Despite the earlier police incidents from 2019, the FOID card was approved. After receiving the permit, Cremo was legally allowed to purchase firearms. Investigators later confirmed that he passed 4 background checks during subsequent purchases. Between 2020 and 2021, Cremo acquired several weapons. Among them was the Smith & Wesson rifle that prosecutors said was used during the parade attack. The firearm had been purchased online and shipped to a dealer in Lake Villa, Illinois. From there, it was picked up through the standard transfer process required by federal law. For investigators reviewing the timeline after the shooting, this sequence illustrated how earlier warning signs had not resulted in a legal barrier to firearm ownership. The FOID approval meant Cremo could legally acquire weapons despite the previous police reports. But as authorities continued examining his background, they began discovering another area that raised additional concerns. Investigators soon turned their attention to Cremo's activity online. What they found there would provide further insight into the mindset of the person who had carried out the attack. As investigators continued examining Cremo's background, they also began reviewing his online activity. Authorities discovered that Cremo had been creating and publishing music under the stage name Awake the Rapper. The music had been uploaded to platforms including YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music. At first glance, the content appeared to be part of an online persona connected to independent music. However, investigators soon began identifying themes within the videos and lyrics that raised concerns. Several music videos included animated scenes depicting shootings and other forms of violence. Some of the imagery showed characters firing weapons at groups of people. Other videos contained stylized depictions of armed individuals in public settings. In addition to the music videos, investigators discovered that Cremo had maintained an online presence across several digital communities. Authorities reported that he operated a Discord server connected to his music persona. The server allowed followers to interact with him and with one another. Investigators also determined that Cremo had posted material on a website known as Documenting Reality. The site is known for hosting graphic and disturbing content shared by users. According to investigators, 1 week before the parade attack, Cremo posted a video showing a beheading on that website. Researchers who later examined his online presence also reported imagery and symbols associated with extremist meme culture. Some of the content included references that had circulated on internet subculture forums. Despite these discoveries, investigators later stated that they did not identify confirmed racial or religious motive connected to the attack. Instead, the online material became part of the broader digital evidence that investigators reviewed while reconstructing Cremo's activities. As the investigation continued, authorities also began examining whether the attack had involved planning in the weeks or months before July 4th. The next set of discoveries suggested that the events of that morning may not have been spontaneous. Investigators later stated that Cremo had planned the attack for several weeks before it took place. According to authorities, he had spent time studying the layout of the Highland Park Independence Day parade route. One method he reportedly used was traveling through the downtown area on a bicycle. By moving through the streets ahead of time, investigators believe he was able to observe the parade route and identify possible vantage points. One of those vantage points would eventually become the rooftop of the Ross Cosmetics building. The building sat along Central Avenue near 2nd Street, directly overlooking part of the parade route. From that position, Someone standing on the roof could see large portions of the crowd gathered below. Authorities also later revealed that investigators believed Cremo had considered carrying out an attack earlier. According to police, he had planned a similar act during the Independence Day celebration in 2020. However, that year's parade was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the event did not take place. Another incident that drew investigators' attention occurred roughly 3 months before the 2022 shooting. During that time, Cremo entered the Central Avenue Synagogue while a Passover Seder was taking place. The synagogue was located only a short distance from the parade route. Officials at the synagogue asked him to leave the building. No criminal charges were filed in connection with that incident. However, the event later became one of several details investigators examined while reconstructing the timeline of Cremo's movements in the months leading up to the attack. By the time authorities had assembled this information, a clearer picture of preparation had begun to emerge. Investigators now had evidence suggesting that the shooting had not been an impulsive act. Instead, it appeared to have involved planning, reconnaissance, and the selection of a location that provided a clear vantage point over a crowded public event. While investigators worked to understand how the attack had been prepared, the community was still coming to terms with the human cost of what had happened on the parade route that morning. As investigators continued piecing together how the attack had unfolded, the community of Highland Park was also learning the identities of the people who had lost their lives. 7 individuals died as a result of the shooting. Their ages ranged from 35 to 88 years old. 5 of the victims were pronounced dead at the scene. 2 others later died after being transported to local hospitals. The victims were identified as Catherine Goldstein, age 64, Jacqueline Sundheim, age 63, Stephen Strauss, age 88, Nicholas Toledo Zaragoza, age 78, Eduardo Uvaldo, age 69, Kevin McCarthy, age 37, and Irina McCarthy, age 35. Many of the victims had been attending the parade with family members. Kevin and Irina McCarthy had been there with their young child. Both parents died as a result of the attack. Their child survived. In the days following the shooting, a fundraising campaign was created to support the child. The campaign received widespread attention. Within a short period of time, the fundraiser raised more than $3 million in donations. Among the dozens of people injured during the attack was Cooper Roberts. Cooper had attended the parade with his family. He was struck and later became paralyzed from the waist down. Another victim also suffered injuries that resulted in paraplegia. In total, 48 people were injured during the attack. Some had been struck by gunfire. Others were injured by debris or during the chaos that followed the first shots. For many residents of Highland Park, the identities of the victims brought the reality of the attack closer to home. The parade had been a long-standing community tradition. Many of the people who attended it each year knew one another. In the hours and days after the shooting, the focus of the investigation remained on understanding how the attack had occurred. But the community itself was also beginning to confront the lasting impact of what happened that morning. In the days following the arrest of Cremo, prosecutors began filing criminal charges connected to the attack. On July 5, 2022, one day after the shooting, authorities announced 7 counts of first-degree murder. As the investigation continued, additional charges were added. Later that month, a grand jury returned an indictment containing 117 felony counts. The charges included 21 counts of first-degree murder, 48 counts of attempted murder, and 48 counts of aggravated battery. Cremo initially entered a plea of not guilty. The case then moved through the pretrial process over the following years. Court proceedings were scheduled to begin in early 2025. Jury selection for the trial began on February 24th. However, the trial itself would never fully take place. On March 3, 2025, Cremo changed his plea. He entered guilty pleas to all 69 counts that were brought forward in the case. The decision meant that prosecutors would no longer need to present evidence to a jury. Instead, the case would move directly towards sentencing. Sentencing took place on April 24, 2025. The hearing was overseen by Judge Victoria Rossetti. Cremo chose not to attend the sentencing hearing. During the proceedings, survivors and family members of the victims delivered statements describing how the attack had affected their lives. At the conclusion of the hearing, the court delivered its sentence. Cremo received 7 consecutive life sentences. In addition, the court imposed a total of 2,400 years for the attempted murder charges. The sentence included no possibility of parole. The following day, April 25, 2025, Cremo was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. A man calls 911 and tells dispatchers that he has just stopped a terrible attack inside his own home. He says an unknown man entered the house, attacked his wife, and forced him to act in self-defense. By the time officers arrive, one person is already gone, and another is in a really bad way. Inside the bedroom, the scene appears chaotic, but also strangely contained. There are no signs of forced entry anywhere in the home. The child who lives there is found downstairs, completely okay. In this video, I will share 7 unbelievable facts and 1 piece of highly disturbing footage from inside the scene. Stick around to see it all. Christine Banfield was a pediatric intensive care nurse living in Herndon, Virginia. Her work involved caring for critically ill children, as well as serving as a nurse examiner. She lived with her husband, Brendan Banfield, and their young daughter in a suburban home. Brendan worked as a criminal investigator with the Internal Revenue Service, a role that involved federal law enforcement responsibilities. From the outside, the family appeared stable. They had been together for nearly 2 decades, having met during their freshman year at university. Their life followed a structure that many would recognize: careers established, a home purchased, a child being raised in a quiet neighborhood.
Just a super quick one while I'm out here. I'm Jack, by the way, this is Dark Case. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is watching the channel, supporting it. Thank you to everyone that's become a channel member as well. I'm up to 273 channel members. I'm aiming for 300 by the end of May, so if you can make that happen, it'd be amazing. It's genuinely helping the channel to keep on going, so just thank you so much. Today's silly little question: do you prefer Snickers or Mars? Let me know down in the comments, and I'm just going to leave you to it. Here's the video. Let's go.
At some point in 2021, Christine made the decision to bring additional help into the household. She arranged for an au pair to live with the family and assist with childcare. In October of that year, Juliana Perez Magalhães arrived from Brazil and began working in the home. Her role was to help care for the couple's young daughter and become part of the household routine. This arrangement placed her inside the home on a daily basis. She was present for the rhythms of family life. She had access to shared spaces, schedules, and routines. And over time, that proximity created something that investigators would later focus on. Because by August 2022, the relationship between Brendan and Juliana had changed. It had become personal. What began as a professional arrangement had shifted into a full-blown extramarital relationship. This development introduced a new dynamic inside the home, one that was not visible from the outside, and one that would later become central to understanding everything that followed. The relationship between Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez Magalhães had moved beyond anything professional. According to court testimony, the two began an extramarital affair while Christine was out of town visiting family. This was not a brief interaction or a single moment. The relationship continued over time and included travel together, including a trip to New York City in January 2023. This really showed that the relationship was not hidden in isolated moments. It extended outside the home and into shared experiences. During this period, Brendan began expressing a desire to end his marriage. At this stage, other than the affair, nothing darker was happening. Just a relationship formed, a constraint has been identified, the marriage, and a wish been introduced for the marriage to be over. So what happens next when those 3 elements exist at the same time? In early January 2023, a digital footprint began to build. On January 9th, a Gmail account was created using a Samsung device. The account later linked to activity in the case. would become part of a broader pattern investigators examined. Just days later, on January 17th, a profile was created on a fetish website using Christine Banfield's identity. The account used the name Anastasia9. According to the prosecution, this account was not controlled by Christine. Instead, it was created and operated by Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez Magalhaes. The purpose of the account becomes clearer when looking at the messages that followed. Communication began with individuals on the platform, eventually leading to contact with a man named Joseph Ryan. Ryan had no known prior connection to the Banfield family. From his perspective, he was communicating with a woman who appeared to be willingly engaging in a specific type of encounter. The messages included instructions. He was told to bring restraints. He was told to bring a sharp implement. He was told that he could enter the home through an unlocked door. These details are important because they define expectation. They establish what Ryan believed he was walking into. Digital communication leaves a trail. Timestamps, device usage, login locations, and message patterns all become points of analysis. In this case, those records showed repeated access to the account across January and February 2023. There were also moments where activity occurred when Brendan was not physically at the home. This creates a conflict. If access happened from multiple devices at different times, who was actually controlling the account? Investigators approach this by looking at overlap. When do devices align with physical presence? When do messages correspond with known movements? By February 19th, the communication had progressed to a key moment. Joseph Ryan had agreed to meet. He was given instructions for the morning of February 24th. He was told when to arrive, where to park, and how to enter the home. On the morning of February 24th, 2023, the sequence of events began early. Christine Banfield was asleep in the upstairs bedroom of the home. Her phone had been powered off and placed inside a drawer in the kitchen. This detail becomes relevant because it limits her ability to communicate or respond to anything happening inside the house. At the same time, Brendan Banfield left the residence and drove to a nearby McDonald's. Surveillance footage later confirmed his movements inside the restaurant, including a period where he remained in the restroom before receiving a call. This establishes a timeline anchor away from the home. Meanwhile, Juliana left the house with the couple's 4-year-old daughter. She drove a short distance away and waited nearby while carrying a firearm. This creates a second point of positioning outside the home. At approximately 7:40 a.m., Joseph Ryan arrived at the property. The front door was unlocked. He entered the home under the belief that he was meeting Christine for a consensual encounter that had been arranged through prior messages. Around this same time, Juliana returned to the residence with the child. Calls were placed to Christine's phone, but the device went straight to voicemail. This aligns with the earlier detail that the phone had been powered off. The child was then taken into the basement and left there. After this, both Brendan and Juliana moved upstairs toward the bedroom. What happens next becomes the central event of the case. Inside that room, Joseph Ryan was shot in the head. Christine Banfield sustained multiple stab wounds to the upper body. Ryan showed signs of movement after the initial shot. A second shot was then fired. At this point, both individuals had sustained fatal injuries. From a timeline perspective, the sequence is tightly controlled. Each movement, from leaving the house to returning, aligns within a narrow window of time. Investigators later focused on how structured that sequence appeared when compared to the unpredictability of a spontaneous intrusion. At 7:47 a.m., a call was placed to emergency services from Juliana's phone. The call lasted only 8 seconds. No clear explanation was given before the line disconnected. This brief call becomes significant because it marks the first official contact with authorities. In the moments that followed, investigators later determined that changes were made inside the bedroom. Joseph Ryan's body was moved. Christine Banfield's blood was transferred onto Ryan's hands and clothing. Blood flow patterns were later identified in multiple directions, which suggested movement after the initial injuries. From a forensic standpoint, This kind of transfer can indicate post-event manipulation rather than a continuous struggle. At 8 a.m., a second call was placed to 911. This time, a clear narrative was provided. An unknown man had entered the home. He had attacked Christine with a sharp implement. Brendan Banfield had responded by shooting him. During the call, Banfield identified himself as a federal agent and stated that he had acted to stop the attack. When officers arrived, they encountered a scene that initially aligned with that explanation. A man had been shot. A woman had been seriously injured. The investigation now truly begins. As investigators moved beyond the initial scene, the focus shifted to verification. The first major issue was the lack of forced entry. There were no signs that anyone had broken into the home. This directly conflicted with the idea of a random intruder. If entry was not forced, then access was either allowed or arranged. The next layer involved forensic evidence. DNA recovered from the sharp implement showed Christine Banfield could not be excluded as a contributor, while Brendan, Juliana, and Joseph Ryan were excluded. This finding becomes important because it does not support a scenario where Brendan used that weapon during a struggle. Investigators then examined Christine's forensic examination results. No male DNA was found in areas that would support her SA scenario. This directly challenges the narrative that Ryan had attacked her in the way described. Another key detail involved blood evidence. Christine's blood was found on Joseph Ryan's hands. However, analysis suggested the red DNA had been transferred from above rather than through direct contact during an active struggle. This distinction matters because it indicates positioning rather than interaction. It suggests that the scene may have been altered after the injuries occurred. Ballistic analysis also linked a cartridge case to the Glock, purchased by Brendan Banfield. This ties the firearm used in the incident directly back to him. Each of these findings does not independently prove intent, but together they begin to remove the possibility of a spontaneous event. Investigators often work by elimination. If forced entry is ruled out, and physical evidence does not support the stated sequence, then the original explanation becomes increasingly unlikely. At that point, the question changes. Not what happened, but why the story does not match the evidence. In the weeks following the incident, attention shifted to what happened inside the home after the investigation began. By March 2023, Juliana had moved into the master bedroom that had previously belonged to Christine Banfield. Photographs inside the room were replaced with images of herself and Brendan Banfield. This change occurred within a relatively short period of time after the incident. Investigators often examine how environments are altered following major events. Changes in personal space, especially in areas directly connected to the incident, can become relevant when establishing patterns. During this same period, the relationship between Brendan and Juliana continued. Prosecutors later stated that the affair did not end after the incident. Behavior after an event does not determine what happened, but it can raise questions about consistency. Does it align with the version of events being presented, or does it introduce further contradictions?
Tomorrow, jury selection begins in the murder trial of Brendan Banfield. Prosecutors say Banfield and his family's au pair came up with an elaborate plan to kill his wife, Christine Banfield, and another man, Joseph Ryan. The au pair, Juliana Perez Magalis, has pled guilty to manslaughter, and she's expected to testify against Banfield. One of the victim's relatives opens up about that horrific day and the moment she found out what happened.
I remember when I got the call, and I just know when he told me that I could hear my own voice screaming. And I remember that moment, and I remember where I was sitting, and I remember his words. But it was almost like it was outside of my body hearing. The
case eventually moved into the courtroom in January 2026. The prosecution's argument relied heavily on two elements: digital evidence and the testimony of Juliana Perez Magallanes. By this point, she had pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in the case of Joseph Ryan and also agreed to testify against Brendan Banfield. Her account described a planned scenario in which Ryan was brought to the home under false pretenses. According to her testimony, the scene had been arranged in advance and later altered to appear as a failed intrusion.
Members of the local Brazilian community in the courtroom question if there was conspiracy.
A lot of people believe that Juliana is not guilty, that she didn't do anything, and a lot of people believe that her and him were planning together.
Officials say Ryan was in the Banfield's home because he responded to an account for sexual focus. The defense says the au pair called Brandon about an unknown car in the driveway. When they both walked in, Brandon reportedly went up to his bedroom upstairs and Ryan in the head, out of self-defense after he allegedly stabbed his wife, who prosecutors say was naked at the time. The au pair confessed to detectives that Brandon instructed her to get a second gun in the safe in the bathroom closet. She says she fired one round through Ryan's chest while he was still on the floor moving. The judge says her confession is one reason why her second-degree murder charge must stay.
So everyone just wants to know the truth.
Brendan Banfield also took the stand today with his attorney watching his every answer. He pled the fifth to most of the questions out of concern he could incriminate himself in the future.
The defense challenged this version of events. They argued that the investigation had flaws and that digital evidence could not definitively prove who controlled the accounts used to contact Ryan. They also questioned Juliana's credibility, pointing out that her testimony came after she secured a plea agreement. Brendan Banfield took the stand in his own defense. He admitted to the affair but denied any plan to harm his wife. He maintained that he had returned home and encountered a violent situation already in progress. This created a central issue for the jury, two conflicting accounts, one supported by forensic and digital analysis, the other based on a direct claim of self-defense. In February 2026, the jury reached its decision. Brendan Banfield was found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder, along with a firearm offence and child endangerment. He faces a mandatory life sentence. Shortly after that, Juliana Perez Magalhaes was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The court rejected a recommendation that she receive time served, stating that her involvement had been essential to the outcome. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.